hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Unlocked Show. I'm your host, Tracy Wilson. This is the place that you'll learn all things to do with online business and how to run a really successful one. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking with the amazing Nathan Stuck, who's going to be talking to us about how the heck do we build a business that's actually a force for good. So we always want to do that, of course, right? So you guys want to make sure that those of you that are watching the Unlocked Show, you guys are all really good people. We want to be doing the right thing. And if we can, being able to do some really good stuff for our local community, but also, globally too. So I've asked Nathan to be on today's show because I know that he, with his experience and his wisdom and being an award-winning leader in the B Corp community, and in addition to his role as a director of corporate culture and strategic impact at Victoriam Solution, which is a certified B Corp, and he's also funded and runs a local B business in Georgia. We've just been having a great old conversation behind the scenes about football. So you're probably going to see on the screen right now behind Nathan, a whole lot of football paraphernalia, huge football fan. So we've just, he's in a bit of commiserations this week because his team didn't do so fantastic. So, being on the Unlocked Show is going to be the highlight of his week. It's kind of cool to be able to say, hey, I'm the highlight of somebody's week after they've had such a bad one. So welcome to the show, Nathan. It's fantastic to have you here. And I can't wait to really talk about, how can we start creating our businesses to be a real force for good? How do we actually do that? And we'll even dive into, what the heck does it even mean to be a B Corp, and what sort of things do you do in the community, and why is it so important that we move forward in this manner, particularly with some of the stuff that's going on in the world these days. So welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Tracy. Excited to be here. Always excited to talk purpose, and I don't shy away from purpose and profit. They go hand in hand. So I'm always happy to talk about it.
Fantastic. Well, look, I totally agree. When you start out in business and you're super, super passionate about it and you've got a real purpose, you can't really hang around for very long if you can't turn that into a profit. So I think that is super important that, you've established that right from the get-go. So let's talk a little bit about your background and your history. Tell us a little bit about you. How have you come to be doing what you're doing now? And what's led you to this? How have you become so passionate about this particular cause, being a force for good?
Oh, it's funny. I'm actually working with a friend of mine writing a book right now about my journey to finding a career that I get excited to get out of bed in the morning. So it's a great question. It's a loaded question. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was a bunch of jobs. I feel like that most people, like one of those is my undergraduate degree. I'm not sure which one. But I just kind of graduated. You go to college because you're supposed to go to college. Graduate, and then I knew I wanted to do business, and I got a job in business, and I was dispatching trucks, like exciting stuff. Never what I thought I would be doing, and just never really, I don't know. There was nothing that I moved to Las Vegas. Like, you kept trying to chase happiness, so I was in my 20s. I moved to Vegas for 5 years. I worked for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I did outside sales, which honestly was the best move I've ever made, even though I'm not a good salesperson. The skills you pick up are you're selling everything you do in life. You are selling in some form or another. So I did that. I moved back to Athens, and then I ended up going to get an MBA. And of course, the full-time MBA, a lot of your classmates are 24, 25, and this was part of their plan. They'll work for, and I was just kind of like, I don't know, I'm resetting. So I knew at this point, I knew what I didn't want to do. And this was 2015. So, you go through those core classes, and there was an email that went out, and this company wanted to certify as a B Corp. I was in the Net Impact Club, so it went to us, and I was like, sounds cool. So I went to that first meeting, and excuse me, I met my now CEO, my boss, Jeff, and his wife, and they had 8 employees. They didn't have an office, and they want to certify as a B Corp. And I'm like, first of all, my boss has this ponytail, his shirt's buttoned to here, and you're like, this guy owns a business, who is this guy? And then what's a B Corp? I had no idea, but it just seemed there was something about him and his wife that just seemed really cool and charismatic, and something about the project that seemed like it would provide me something of maybe what I was looking for. So I worked on it. The semester ended. It was for 0 class credit. I worked on it for a semester. In the end of the semester, I told Jeff, I'm like, do you want to keep going with this? Like, we didn't get that far. And so I ended up working on it for my last 2 semesters after my internship. And about halfway through those last 2 semesters, he was like, what are you doing when you graduate? So at this point, we had 20 employees, and we had, I think we had just signed a lease. We had an office that we were going to move into. And so I accepted that offer, and that role just kind of, I don't want to say I created it, but I was so passionate about, once I got into the B Corp and I was, going through the assessment and helping quantify things, and we need to put this new process in, we need to put this policy in the handbook. I just fell in love with this work. And I honestly was doing director of operations when I came in. That was my background. That's what they needed. Most 20 employee companies can't afford a director of culture and strategic impact. And as we've grown, over the years, to 35 to 60 to 85, and now we're like, I think 136, I think is the exact number. Like, this is a full-time role. And we hired somebody, we saw it, we hired somebody, trained them to do the operations piece. And I just get to be a student of this world, of how to create engaging jobs, how to make an impact in the community, and how to really be that, we call them beekeepers, but that keeper of all things purpose driven. So I know every number, I know retention by demographics, I know everything in our company. So yeah, long kind of journey to it, but I found it.
That's fantastic. And, like you say, often we go through, life kind of dabbling in a few different things. We start out, we think, okay, well, I'm going to have to go to college. I'm going to have to get a degree of some sort, and then fall into a job thinking that that's where you're going to stay for some time. And then you realize that, hang on a minute, this is not quite what I want to do. And off you went on another path. So congratulations to you for kind of identifying that and then jumping full in to do your MBA and be like, okay, well, I'm going to be in this classroom with a whole bunch of, young bucks who are probably looking at me thinking, what the heck's this guy doing here? But, and then moving forward with that. And that's a fantastic growth in the company that you're in right now. So congratulations for that too. Look, for those that are not familiar with this terminology, because, B Corp, what exactly is it? And why should, particularly, those that are watching the Unlock show right now are predominantly, smaller based businesses. Maybe they're even startups, people that have got a lot of skill, knowledge. They've come out of the corporate space and are now immersing themselves into the online world. How does that what is a B Corp and how does it fit in to into the online world?
Yeah, so B Corps are for-profit businesses, and the B stands for benefit. Hence I keep getting confused with the way the camera pointing to the wrong shoulder. But hence my little B Corp button. But it stands for benefit. It was started by 3 gentlemen out that had started a company in America called And One. It was a basketball apparel company. And when I remember it, I'm a child of the 90s. So like when they exited,
I remember it.
Yeah, it was like all the mixtapes. I mean, they were great. And apparently, I didn't know this at the time. I was, a teenager in the 90s, but I didn't realize how well they treated their employees, and that they had factories overseas, and they were paying American living wages, and they had nothing in there, though. The standard corporate governance has always been shareholder primacy. Milton Friedman, businesses exist to create value for their shareholders. They're in the business of doing business, and when they eventually sold, they didn't really have anything to protect them. So they didn't have any legal protections against, like, you get to a certain point where you legally aren't allowed to say, but what about our employees? But what about our community initiatives? But what about the impact that we've been able to make? Like, is this company that's buying us going to carry on any of that work? You can't even talk about that. It's just, does it create the most value for our shareholders? And so they watched their baby kind of get ripped apart overnight, and they kind of decided, we need to start something that helps entrepreneurs kind of protect their legacy. Not that necessarily every company is going to scale and sell, but a lot of them will. So they created B Lab, which is a nonprofit, and now there's offices all over the world. But they started B Lab US and Canada, excuse me, and basically they are the nonprofit that oversees the certification. So when companies go through the assessment, there's an actual assessment that you have to take. There's 5 sections. There's corporate governance, there's community, There's workers, there's environment, and then there's customers. So, everything from like customer section, everything from what do you disclose? How do you share data? What do you use data for? Emails and things like that. To do you have a customer guarantee? Do you have a customer success? Do you have, in the worker section, we'll have things like, what's the pay multiplier from top to bottom? What's the, what benefits do you offer? What benefits do you offer part-time employees? What benefits do you offer full-time employees? And then governance has, have transparency, obviously environmental has environmental questions about, and a lot of it's around goal setting. It's around quantifying your numbers. It's about understanding your current state and where you are, and where you want to go. And so it's a very interesting, complex, all-inclusive kind of like scorecard on your business.
Mm-hmm.
And once you submit, then you go through an audit. So you go through an audit process, and then somebody from B Lab, they have, audit standards analysts is what they're called. And they go through like question by question, of like, kind of like prove it. And then every 3 years you have to actually recertify. So you can't just like certify and then like start like turn the sludge lever again and start dumping into the waterway. Like, you have to continue to do, which is a lot of my role, is making sure that we don't wake up. We just recertified this year. We don't wake up in 2024 and go, we forgot to do it all. Like, we forgot about the impact part. I'm the one that's kind of like the whisper in the ear of, hey, here's where our numbers are. Hey, here's our current demographics. Hey, here's this cool initiative we could get involved with. So, I mean, and then I guess the 10-word answer is B Corps are to businesses what LEED is to a building, or certified organic is to milk, is basically the premise.
Well, I love that, that whole holistic approach to it, and not just looking at things from, a one point of view, which is that shareholder profit standpoint. You're actually looking at the whole of business and every component and every stakeholder within that business, and how can you actually be beneficial to everybody so that everybody wins. That old analogy of you lifting all boats together. So so I love that. And I think it sounds to me like that whole system is very much built around intention and integrity, because you're starting out with a very specific intention, which is to do good for everybody. And then the integrity side of things is the fact that you've got to recertify on a regular basis. And I think that's kind of cool, because it means that, like you say, you can't kind of get certified one day and say, well, I'm certified organic, but now all of a sudden I'm putting a whole lot of, preservatives and pesticides and all sorts of other things into my business, and then find that, well, once we were organic, we still say we're organic, but we're actually not really truly doing all of the things that we should be to maintain that level of organicness. So I love the fact that you're having to do this. So for a small, given that it's a relatively like I've done a little bit of research on this too, in terms of the community base, because it's not huge yet, right? So even though it's all around the world and the concept is definitely, getting momentum, what sort of things, when would you recommend that a business, whether it be a solopreneur or a larger business, actually start to look at this as a way of doing business, as a way of implementing these things into the fabric of what they do?
As early as possible. I don't know that necessarily like certification, you have to have been in business for a year to certify. But the assessment itself is free and accessible. So, I'm working with a buddy who just went out on his own this year, and I'm like, I mean, I know you're not ready. Like, he's still, he got his first client this week, like he knows where he wants to go, but I'm like, start tracking though. Like, he did something for my nonprofit for a discount, and I'm like, make sure you're keeping that, either note it in the QuickBooks invoice, or keep a Google sheet at this point, but just note that you gave me a pro bono discount for my nonprofit to make this affordable for us to be able to afford, because he came out and recorded an event we had. So I'm like, start thinking about those things though. Track your community impact. Track your suppliers. Start keeping that spreadsheet of I know everything from, are they female owned? Are they minority owned? Are they local? Are they within 50 miles of our headquarters? Like, start thinking about like, okay, all these things, they kind of give you the playbook to be impactful. Like, to follow the United Nations, all the SDGs. It is the playbook of like, how diverse is our workforce? If you say you care about gender, have you looked at your employee roster right now? I know when we started this, I mean, granted, we were at 8 employees. It was definitely the foundation upon which we built the business, because that was why they did it. They wanted to build something different. They wanted to build not another consulting company. And 25, 30 employees. When we certified towards the end of, I think it was after we certified, but like the end of 2019, we were 73-74% white male. And it's like, you say you care, but you're looking at your numbers, you're like, but do we? And then what's the strategy? Like, and I think that's the important part of doing it early. It's a lot easier. You're still turning a speedboat, not an ocean, not a freight liner, or a big ocean liner. So I think that's the easiest part of doing it early, is to start baking that into the company DNA. And I wouldn't necessarily say that you have to certify right away, because it might not be right. But especially though in the B2C side, it's becoming a nice differentiator as Gen Z generates, they make disposable income now. I heard something on the radio today, and the guy was still talking about millennials, and his co-host was like, dude, millennials have like kids and mortgages now. Like, they're not in college. That's Gen Z. Like, and I know that, like, the oldest Gen Z, I think, turns 27 next year. The oldest millennial turns 41. Yeah. So I think the time it's never a bad time to at least go through the assessment and go like, how do I put my money where my mouth is? Like, here is literally a cheat sheet. And like the weights of the different answers in the questions that they're asking, of like, like, oh, dang, like, do we have an annual impact report? What do we put in our annual impact report? Like, never thought about that, but put it on your radar, and maybe this year, like, you have 8 customers, you don't need an annual impact report yet, but you can start thinking kind of strategically of like, where are we going to be in 2, 3, 4 years? And how do I make these how do I start tracking these KPIs? And B, how do I put strategies around, just as I would like revenue? So as I'm doing long-term strategic planning, that I'm planning to hire a diverse workforce. I'm not just talking about, and then you wake up, because most startups, you hire your friends and your cousin and all the people you probably shouldn't be hiring. And, and then you wake up and it's, 30 people that look like you.
Yeah. So for, again, just to help everybody understand, why would somebody want to do this? Like, what is the impact from a business perspective? From a point of view, because when we start out in business, generally speaking, there's going to be maybe 3 things that are going to happen. 1, you're building your business to hang on to it forever. It's going to be your income. 2nd will be, you're creating it as a legacy to be able to hand it down to someone else. The 3rd being, we want to grow this up so that we can actually sell it. So in either of those 3 cases, or in all of those 3 cases, like, what are some of the major benefits that you're seeing for businesses that actually go down this route?
A lot of it is, and it's funny, I teach a B Corp class, and I used to shy away from doing like ROI analyses. But I have MBA students, so I'm like, do an ROI analysis for this owner. Like, let's do one. But I also brought them back to, what's his goal? What is his goal with this company? Is it 8 employees? And they're a risk management company. I'm like, is it 8 employees forever? Or do they want to be 150 employees? And the answer was, no, he really wants to scale this thing. And I said, okay, so who's he going to hire? And they're like, well, I think he's looking at hiring people right out of college. I'm like, okay, so Gen Z. Okay, so pull some demographics on what Gen Z cares about. Find me one that says they care about money, like overwhelmingly over purpose. Well, they care about money. They want to make a livelihood. They want a job they care about. So I think there's an aspect of that in there that is a compelling argument, both from the consumer side and the employee side. I wrote a piece 6 months ago, I did. It was right after my lecture on Milton Friedman. So how many times can I mention Milton Friedman tonight? That's 3. So But I wrote it on at the end of his Friedman Doctrine. He says something about the consumer and the employee will be the death blow of this social, consciousness, conscious capitalism. And he was right. Unfortunately, they went in the other direction. It was kind of the end of like shareholder primacy. They don't care about making as much money as possible. They don't care about buying the cheapest product available. They care about people that do business the right way, and that's who they want to work for. And I think especially in the last 12, 18 months, you've seen this come like full circle with COVID and kind of the great, whatever you want to call it, racial awakening, where it was like, okay, what are we actually doing to solve this problem upstream, as opposed to just being like, well, I thought I was a good person. So I think the commitment is there now. And then I will also add on top of that, because of that, everybody's doing it. And not everybody's doing it for the right reasons. So I think the B Corp thing, and I always do this, it's the bundle that brings all your good together. So I think that certification is a way to kind of signal to the marketplace that like, yeah, we're legit. It's a tedious process. Like it took us 2 years to get there. The bigger the company, kind of the longer it takes. And that wasn't with like waiting for our audit. That was literally just the amount of work. Like we didn't have a handbook. Well, of course we wrote one. Then you realize like later, you're like, you can Google that. And there's handbooks on the internet, there's a lawyer that probably has a template that they can draft one for you in about 2 hours of build work. So, I think that's a big thing. It's just a big differentiator. And I think so even more in the B2C space. I can't make an ROI argument for us. We do Salesforce implementations. So somebody buys Salesforce, we come in and whatever. Well, we don't touch wires. We have really smart people. They don't let me touch the technology. But I don't know that anybody's buying from us because like, ooh, they're a B Corp. They're like, are they really, can they get us the max return on our investment in this Salesforce technology? And can they make it work? And can they understand our business needs? I will say we've hired people. I've seen, I do a survey for new hires. I'm like, hey, why did you work for us? Like, why did you sign your offer letter? And you see a lot of the ones we hire pretty aggressively out of undergraduate programs. And you see that in their answer, B Corp. I just thought it was different. I thought it was really cool. Love that you were a B Corp, things like that. So on the recruitment side, it's helped us. On the business development side, I don't know that it has. But on the B2C side, I think there is a definite ability to get that. I don't want to say disposable income. It sounds like you're this greedy, like get their disposable income. But I think to attract customers, like I know when I shop, what did I buy this year? Like for Christmas, it's Tom's shoes. It's a Patagonia. She's in the other room. It's Athleta. Like I bought from B Corps because I know, and they might not be perfect. I don't think any company's ever perfect, but I know they're on that journey and they put in a lot of work to be a really good company. So
I suppose that's the answer to this question, isn't it? That sometimes there isn't always a direct ROI from a financial aspect, but in somewhere it always does come back to the finances at some point. Because if you're thinking about, okay, well, why do employees want to join us? Because they've said, hey, you guys are pretty cool. I see you're on the B Corp. That must mean something. That must mean that you're doing good. I want to work for a company that's doing good. Therefore, easier to potentially attract a new employee, particularly those the Gen Zs, which I'll get to in a moment. And then the second part being, retention, as you say, that B2C being to consumer, you saying, well, hey, I'm prepared to support a company that has actually got a business that's doing good in the world. So there might not necessarily be a direct correlation to financial ROI, but there is from maybe it's an intangible, from a social responsibility point of view, employee satisfaction, and a whole raft of other things that I would imagine would come with just being darn good people, and when you come at things from that point of view, people want to work for you, people want to buy your stuff, and they're likely to come back again and again and again. So that's kind of what I would see as the some major benefits in being, associated with a B Corp. I mean, you rattled off all of the different names of all the different companies that are in, that B Corp space, and you were prepared to go and buy from them simply because they were so, which is great. The other thing that I think is, you mentioned about, particularly from an employee standpoint, that lots of people are not always driven these days by the almighty dollar. They're not always worried about, well, how much are you going to pay me? It may have been the case some years ago, but I've been reading some studies fairly recently about the number of employees who are actually leaving permanent employment now, particularly because of the whole COVID situation. And I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on this too. But we're seeing this mass exodus out of the 9 to 5 job, because people don't want to be, they've realized that, hey, I've had a little bit of a taste of this working from home. I've had a little bit of a taste of, this flexible environment. And maybe where I am right now with, the pandemic and so forth has actually brought a lot of people to that kind of almost to that edge of the cliff, thinking, is this really what I want? Or do I want to be doing something quite different? And most people that I've been talking to are shifting their thoughts from, I want to earn a whole lot of money, to actually, I want to do something that I'm really passionate about, that has some meaning and purpose to it, that does good in this world. So I think the whole B Corp, what would we call it, momentum, and it is really well positioned for where people's mindsets are at right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I mean, yeah, the Great Resignation's real, and
Yeah.
and it's an interesting thing. I mean, I can't wait to study this in 10 years, to see all the quantitative and qualitative research that comes out of this.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, there's this big push where people tasted freedom, if you will. Like, I've had the chair watching jobs where you've got the flu and you have the ability to work from home. The internet worked in 2011. I worked from the road when I was, this is when I was in sales, but yet I was back in town. And so, like, you have to be in the office with the flu, with your suit on. Like, why? And none of that made any sense to me. And I never really understood it. It was like, because, and it's interesting. And earlier this year, I actually, I was having a conversation with our CEO about something, and I could tell there was a little bit of a, well, when I came up, and I'm like, I know, but like, just because you had a terrible first job experience doesn't mean everybody wants one, and they're not going to put up with it. And so I ran our company demographics and showed them to him, and like, you could see the jaw drop. And the one thing I'll say for him is he's probably the most receptive person to feedback, and the true transparency and candor is our first value, but was like, 37% of our companies under the age 26 or younger. So 36 Gen Z, or excuse me, 37%. And then 79% of our companies under the age of 40. So millennials and Gen, that's it. And so, like, you have our executive team over here, and then you have a bunch of whatever you want to call them, young bucks that are and Gen Z, bless their heart, that, like, millennials, we were kind of afraid, I think, a little bit. We were kind of still had our parents in our ear that were like, you get your job and you're happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
You just deal and you'll be fine. Keep your head down. And so sometimes you're gonna have to do things you don't like. And Gen Z's like, no, we're not doing it. I saw my parents get laid off in 2008 after working somewhere for 20. Like, no. And then millennials kind of got behind the Gen Zs, and we're like, oh, are they starting the rebellion? Because, like, we're in. Like, we were too coward to do it on our own. And so I think you're seeing companies kind of react to that, of like the 9 to 5. And maybe I have blinders on because I work for one of these companies where, like, he had to break me of the habit of, like, he'd be like, hey, I'm an hour and a half from the office. I went in today. I go in maybe once a week, maybe probably like once every 2 weeks. Just because I like to see people. But he had to break me of the habit of he would hit me up on Slack and go like, "Hey, are you coming in this week?" And I'd be like, "Well, I was going to, but and he's like, "Dude, I don't care. I was just asking if you're coming in." Like, but I was so prepared to have like an excuse ready as to why I wasn't in the office, and assuming he's questioning like my loyalty or if I'm actually working. And he's like, "Dude, I don't care. Like, just
I'd actually just like to see you."
I'm
Yeah.
just asking the question. Even today, I saw him. We talked about the football game on Saturday for 5 minutes. And then I was there for like 2 hours. I had to run some errands and do some things in town for us. I mean, it was like a charity drop off, but it was just like, yeah. And I think companies are adapting to that. And honestly, the other shoe that is dropping right now, I think, is a component of this is that not everybody is meant to love remote work. I'm a very, very, very strong extrovert, and it took me a long time to get used to working from home all the time, not seeing my boss, even the like the praise aspect of not getting the like that little like attaboy when you're like in the kitchen. He's like, "Hey, great job on that report." He has to now remember to like go into Slack, "Great job on the report." Like, so like I had a really good mentor taught me like give yourself your own praise. That was my 2021 New Year's resolution, was to get better at that, and I am. But I've I think a lot of people are trying to recreate this remote work environment that resembles an office environment, and it's not it never will. There's no silver bullet. And so I think leaning into that and having that conversation with, hey, it's going to be remote, but hey, here's how it's different. And I think you're starting to see people kind of realize that of like, hey, we've had some employees that were in the office all the time and then COVID remote, and then they decided to move. And I can sense they're struggling, being like not seeing their coworker. And it's like, like, I think it was the right decision for your life. But if you need an office, I would say go get a job where you can go back in an office. So I don't know. It's a loaded question right now. I mean, I've seen, what is it, Facebook or Meta or whatever they're called now. They had a job posting today, director of remote employee engagement. And I'm like, how? Like, how are you going to do that? So
I mean, it's a very, very interesting landscape that we're in right now, right? With this whole almost like engineering of the entire workforce and what things are going to look like. And to your point of, okay, well, let's do some studies on this and see what's actually going to happen, with the great resignation, many, many people resigning. But we also know on the flip side of things, everyone's all gung-ho, hey, let's go and start a business. But we also know that very few businesses actually survive. So, that those that are out there right now, particularly if they're watching, today's show, if you've got some business skill and you know your stuff and you're a good teacher, then there's going to be a load of people out there wanting your mentorship and your help to actually get them to the point where they can actually thrive in a business. Because it's quite like, to your point of, it's a very different beast going from working in an office to now I'm going to take my office and just plonk it in my home and expect that it's going to operate in the same way. It doesn't. It takes some time. I think you were mentioning, it took a little while for you to get used to that. It certainly did me, being, someone who enjoys being around people too, to all of a sudden, oh, I don't even have a dog. I don't even have that person an animal to talk to. So you are on your own in that case. But then also, taking the leap out of being an employee now into being an employer of oneself, potentially an employer of other people, and running your own business, quite a different beast again. So I think there's some massive opportunities that are out there right now for those people that obviously are loving what you're talking about today in terms of becoming a B Corp. And I know that there's a process that you go through, and the answer to, when should I get started? Well, no time like the present. You can get started now. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go and get yourself certified. No, it doesn't. But if you have an interest in this and you're serious about implementing it, can they just go and get the checklist or, that you're talking about, and just start implementing some things until such time as they're at a point where they're ready to actually apply, through the correct process.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, anybody can create an account and log in. I think it's bimpactassessment.net. and you go in, create in
Pop
like
that in.
you, yeah, and you can answer. And honestly, there's I forget the number of versions of this thing that there are. I think there's like with all the different like permutations because it's as you answer a question, it will unlock other questions. So if you say like, what demographics do you track? None. Okay. Well, those next three questions don't open up. Okay, what percentage of your workforce is female? What percentage of your workforce is underrepresented minority? What percentage of your workforce is under 24, over 55? Like those three questions are hidden unless you answer yes, we track employee demographics. So you can go through and play with it, and honestly, just give yourself a score. Like there's, and it's funny because every company, and again, I teach a class at UGA, and I've been working with these students. They finally hired me part time to actually teach the class, but I've probably done 25 to 30 of these. And it's funny to see the look on the face of the client when they're like, "Oh, a 40," they thought they were like the greatest company in the world, and you're like, I mean, and I tell them, I'm like, we were for everybody, like that's where the work starts. Okay, so like you weren't as great as you thought you were. Like I've seen, I think in like 4 years of doing these projects, out of the the 30 or so we've worked on, one until this semester, we're going to get two across the finish line this semester where they're actually going to be at the needed 80 points. So that'll put us at 3. So 10% of the companies we've worked with have actually in one semester gotten to 80, which means they were probably pretty good to start with. But I mean, we've worked with some killer brands in Georgia that, we're doing a ton of good. And they're like, all right, so we did it. We finished it. We're at a 42. And you're like, don't feel bad about it. I think there's a little bit of a shame, but it's like, okay, now let's look at like where could we get more points? Like, and again, you're just trying to see like what, and honestly, for somebody,
what's your starting point, right? So you're just trying to get, well, where are you at right now? Where are we starting from? And create yourself, some benchmarks from there.
And you could even chunk it off and say that like, hey, I'm really passionate about our environmental impact and our supply chain and where we're sourcing from and how so just focus on the environmental section, just try to improve that. Or, hey, I've got 3 employees right now, and I know by the end of next year, if my strategic plan pans out the way I've envisioned it, we're going to have 10. Like, so maybe focus on the workers section of like, what are the things that I should be focusing on? What needs to go into the handbook? Like, what do we, even the, like, we laugh all the time about like back in the day, like we put a lactation break policy in the handbook. Not that we would have ever said no, but you start thinking about, though, a new hire comes in, what's their first impression? If they're, especially when you're hiring, somebody in their mid 20s, maybe they want to have kids. Like, oh, wow, there's no parental leave policy. There's no lactation break policy. Like, even though we would have said yes, like go ahead and put that stuff in there. So starting to think about like all those things, and depending on what you're focused on, or you already have 10 employees, maybe now you want to focus on the governance. Like, what are we sharing with our employees? How transparent are we? Do we need them? We share regularly. We share revenue. We share expenses. Like, here's what goes into payroll. Here's what goes into your benefits. Like, we're not just like swimming like, Scrooge McDuck in piles of gold coins. Like, this is the margin, and this is where you can impact the margin. So, I think it depends on what you're focused on, or maybe it's just customers. Maybe you just want to be a very ethical online, B2B or B2C platform. And like, hey, let's focus on what is our data governance policy? Do we have a data governance policy? So I think going through it and it'll help you think about things. And then I always say too, like, you can't improve what you're not measuring. So like, if you say you care about something, put a number to it, and then set yourself a goal and just see what you can do. And like, and if you get your number, you have your current state, and then you say, okay, and especially on this one, it brackets, there's like 5 different whatever thresholds. I just want to move up to the next one next year. Over 2022, let's get to that next threshold of, whatever, completely satisfied customers or whatever. And like, okay, now I've quantified it. What's my strategy around it? Because now you can set a goal and figure out how does this bake into our overall strategy for the company next year. And I think that is an incredibly powerful exercise. I think a lot of people get lost in I don't even know where to start. And I think this is probably one of the best places to start for a purpose-driven entrepreneur.
Well, that's fantastic. Look, let me make sure that I get, I want to make sure that everybody gets that website. Let's, so it was B Impact
Assessment. .net. I'm 99.9% sure.
.net. All right, we
I
will
go to it so
confirm
much that
that is
it's.
the case, but
I was gonna say I go
just,
to it so much that it just autofills. So I'm like, and answer.
all
So I'm
right, well,
like,
let's just pop that up on the screen. There you go, guys. So if you're listening to the podcast right now, it's B for Bob, impactassessment.net. If you head on over there, you should be able to get your hands on that assessment. And if we've got that incorrect, we'll make sure that we correct it in the show notes and description for today anyway. But I think that's fantastic advice. Like, just go over there, do the assessment, get yourself a bit of a starting point. And even I think as you say, it will just allow to stimulate some more thought, allow you to think about various different things. Like you're just saying, having a lactation policy inside of your employee handbooks. Most people wouldn't even think about that, but you've just taken off the table the need for a young woman to even ask. There's no need for the conversation to even be had because it's right there in black and white. It's possible, you can do it. We support you. So, I love the fact that this is going to stimulate some more conversation. And I think it's important for you to do this, even if you are, you're a one woman, one man band right now, because you're not always going to be. You might be that right now, but in a year's time, you'll have maybe 2 or 3 employees and then 6 or 7, just like Nathan's saying with his company. You move to 8, then you got 23, and before you know it, you're up around 80, which is a decent sized business. So, I think the earlier you can start doing this sort of stuff, the better. I absolutely love this whole concept and the movement that is being created around the whole, B Corp side of things and the social impact and the very holistic, point of view that you guys, that the whole system has, that you're looking at it from, a holistic perspective. So before we round out today's show, is there anything else that, like, when you're thinking back over whether it's your career, whether it's the things that you've learned through the B Corp side of things, there's a piece of advice that you could give to another business owner? What would that one piece of advice? We're putting you on the spot a bit here, Nathan. I
cool.
know that, but
No,
what
it's a
would
good
be a
question.
piece of advice you would give?
It's okay to not be perfect. And I think in this day and age too, especially, I don't want to call it whatever, cancel culture, whatever you want to call it. Like, you're never going to please everybody. And you're probably going to get called out for something at some point. But I think, like, to me, it's a journey, and it's not my place to judge where you're at on the journey. I think it's my place to help you along the journey. So, like, don't be afraid to start anywhere. Like, I always use the analogy, and then I'll even show, like, instead of saying, my usual analogy is, if you're going to drive 500, we'll use kilometers tonight.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
But if you're going to drive 500 kilometers, like, you got to drive the first 5, and then 10, and then 15. So, like, I think, and I think this is just in general with a lot of problems society faces. We get so overwhelmed by it, or like, litter, or whatever. It's just like like you're paralyzed with how daunting the problem is. And it's like, well, just go pick up some trash. Start doing something. Like, I even got t-shirts made last year where I was like, this is gonna be my new motto: take action, make progress. Like, just go do, like with these, just go do it. Just start somewhere. Do one thing. Do another. Do a third thing, and, like, kind of make that a habit. And I think with purpose-driven entrepreneurs, and I think I think most people nowadays want to be doing more and want to be doing better. I just think a lot of people are afraid to start, but and you're going to wake up in 10 years and you're nowhere near kilometer 500. You're still at the starting line because you were trying to look for, like, okay, how do I get to 500? And you're like, I drive.
Take one step. Just do one thing. So I want to actually give everybody a bit of a call to action today, which is based on what Nathan has been talking about today. And I love that that saying, take action and make progress. The whole premise of, living your life unlocked, or creating an online business with through the Unlock show is to actually take some action and make some progress every single week. So what I want to ask you now as a listener on today's show is, what's one action that you could take today that will move you one step closer? And it doesn't even matter if that step is one teeny weeny little step, or it could be a leap. Whatever that may be, what is one thing that you could do today? And if you're listening on the podcast, or you're listening to the live show, just type that into the comments section and let us know, what is it that you're going to do? Could be something as simple as heading on over to bimpactassessment.net and actually starting the process of doing the assessment, so you know where you're at. It could be that you're going to review, your own values. It could be, are you reevaluating, are you doing things on purpose? Are you being intentional with your time? It could be anything, but just some form of action to make some form of progress today. So I want to say thank you so much to Nathan. I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I love the concept. I love the movement that he is involved in. And I want to let everybody know, if they want more of Nathan, or, they want to have more of a conversation with you. Have I got this right, Nathan? So they can head on over to LinkedIn, Nathan Stuck. You can connect with Nathan there, and I'm sure that he would be happy to continue this conversation further, give you any more information you need about becoming a B Corp. But thank you very much for being here. It's been a pleasure to have you on the Unlock show, and I hope that we can have you back sometime in the near future too.
Always happy to come on and talk B Corps. Thanks for having me, Tracy.
You're very welcome. All right, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us today. As per normal, I'm going to see you guys again for another episode of the Unlock Show next Wednesday, Australian Eastern Standard Time at 10 a.m. Bye for now.